Welcome back to another look at the post-frame hobby barn. Between the turning of the seasons and the start of a new full-time job, getting time to record and edit took a little bit of a backseat, but since we're here now, let's get into it. As evidenced by the garage door sitting on the floor there, we have a little overlap of footage. But as we transition to the interior, my first goal is going to be to get that interior framing done. Because we're going to heat the barn, we need to insulate it. And because we'll be insulating, we need an inner wall so we don't have exposed insulation. Along with that, the walls are going to both hold and hide the electrical work for a cleaner overall appearance. Since the interior framing is not really adding much to the strength of the structure, I'm using 2x4s for this work. Being on the flat will make for a more forgiving attachment of whatever interior surface I go with. I still haven't really decided between liner panels, some plywood, or drywall for the interior. And because these aren't structural pieces, I can use a nail gun and avoid hand driving all the fasteners. A few laps around the barn, working my way up the walls, and a little bit of work off camera, and then I'm able to tackle the conundrum of the ceiling. The ceiling provides a similar challenge to the walls. If I choose to do a metal liner panel, I have all the structure I need already in place. But the acoustic qualities of a metal ceiling and the added cost are not ideal. So I already know that I'm going to be doing drywall up there. But in order to hang drywall, I need to be at 24 inches or less between supports. So the tedium begins now of measuring centers, measuring spacings, and then starting to place hangers for 2x to support the drywall. This is not the most efficient way to do things, but at this point I still have more time than I have money or help to do it other ways. I could have, or maybe should have, purchased a metal bracket nail gun. It likely would have saved me a few hours and a little bit of elbow soreness, but I really couldn't justify the purchase at this stage. I might be using some joist hangers when we get to the house, but right now that just feels like an eternity away. Once I get a few brackets in place, it's a simple matter to cut some 2x4s to hang in the brackets. Luckily, on day 2, Alila braves the frigid, atypical December temperatures around here to help add some process efficiency. We are eventually able to find a rhythm of her cutting just about as fast as I can place the boards. It is notable that you are not seeing me put in the last few nails on each bracket. This was to make better use of my helping hands while I had them and not make Alila wait on me. I did go back and add all the required fasteners to these brackets off camera. Then it's really not much time at all before I'm placing the final boards. And not only do I now have support for the drywall, but also the ability to work up in the attic space more safely when it comes time to insulate and run the electrical. And, more importantly for me in the moment, the interior structure is now predominantly in place. And I'm able to move on to starting the electrical rough-in and move towards not relying on the generator for lighting the work. Before we watch any of the electrical rough-in, let's take a moment to discuss my plan. From my perspective, there are 3 main ways I could have wired the barn. With NM cable, colloquially known as Romex, with surface-mounted metal conduits, or with hidden conduit, each having their advantages and their drawbacks. NM cable is easy to run and would have saved a bunch of time, but because of the number of circuits and the way they're placed, it would have cost me between 30 and 40% more to run NM. And if I need to add a circuit down the road, it is a bit more challenging because the NM cables must be covered by the walls and it becomes invasive to add more later. Surface-mounted conduits save costs by allowing multiple circuits to be run within the same pipe and using less overall copper. They also allow for easy updates down the road, where I can just pull in a new circuit or reconfigure the existing circuits. However, the big downside is that it does restrict how easy it is to hang things on the wall, which I intend to do, or place shelving or other things against the walls. It also becomes another area that can trap sawdust and debris and just looks aesthetically unpleasing to me. Hidden conduit is a blend of these two, and it takes more time and effort than surface-mounted conduit because it all has to bend and exist within the covered wall. But it does have some of the cost-saving elements that aren't found using the NM cable, while retaining that ability to be reconfigured or pull new circuits down the road. Referring to the aforementioned time versus money conundrum, the route of hidden conduit is the one I've chosen to pursue. With that decision out of the way, let's take a brief look at some of the random assortment of what I'll be using to help accomplish all of this. At the top we've got the conduit, along with various cutting, reaming, bending, and fastening tools. Toss in the stress relief of music and some Mountain Dew, and we have a solid day's worth of progress laying just right here. Next, we have a selection of switches, receptacles, boxes, and fittings that the previous spread of tools is going to be assembling. But before we start working, we need to have a plan of what we're trying to accomplish. I did that by loosely diagramming what I wanted to do. On each wall of the barn, I will be having two 20 amp 110 volt circuits spread across 5 duplex boxes. I will be splitting them so that each box has both an A and a B circuit, and then a C and a D, an E and an F. And since I will generally be the only person in the shop at a given time, aside from battery chargers or 3D printers that may run more or less constantly without user intervention, it would be very unlikely that I'm going to draw too much from any given circuit. I will also have a 30 amp 220 volt circuit on each wall available from at least 2 points along the wall, plus I'm going to have a dedicated dust collector circuit. With similar logic as before, it would be incredibly unlikely that I would ever be running more than one large tool plus that dust collector. Add in the dedicated 15 amp circuit for lights, a dedicated circuit for the boiler so I can heat the floor, and leaving some options open for dedicated heat pump circuits if I wanted to add air conditioning later on, and I've got my work ready for me. As you can see here, I placed the breaker panel near the front of the barn, behind the walk door, to reduce that temptation to place anything around it. I then pulled all of the top knockouts required for an upward departure of the conduits to spider out in the attic space. Since the only other thing that will be up in the attic is insulation, this simplified pulling wires by being able to have intermediate junction boxes, which would minimize the bends between any given wire pull and allow for a greater flexibility if and when I want to reconfigure the building in the future. As a matter of simplicity, all of the 110 circuits are going to live exclusively in half-inch conduits, while the 220 circuits will occupy the 3/4 conduits. This may not be the best or most efficient use of materials, but it does aid in keeping things straight in my head. I am, after all, somewhat of an amateur. Besides, this really does leave the conduit far below the maximum fill allowance, which would again aid in that future updating. Now, because of the embarrassing amount of time it took for me to mark out and bend my conduits, I did that almost exclusively off camera. If you've ever seen a professional bend conduit, it can be a thing of beauty, and had I shared my work with the world, it would have been a little bit of a disgrace to the skills you'll find in other parts of the YouTube world. Through the process, I had moments where things came together and other times when I had to redo some of my mounts or my bends. But I did try to keep the conduits bent similarly and spaced somewhat uniformly. And even though all of this work will eventually be covered up, I wanted to feel good about looking at it until that step takes place. Some of the bends did end up on camera, but before I can even show the outcome of that one, I also have to acknowledge the occasional forgetfulness of working solo. And if you'll excuse me for just a moment on video, I do need to go find the battery I forgot to bring inside for the bandsaw. Alright, let's get back to work. Some of the offsets were better than others, and this one happened to work out pretty well. Alright, let's take a second to look at the placement of the boxes. We can see from various shots that I placed a line approximately 44 inches from the floor. This will be all 110 volt circuits. This is to put everything at approximately bench height, which I plan on having at the circumference of the room. The 220 circuits are just above that same mounting girt and will work really well for how I'm planning to utilize the space. Your mileage may vary if you choose to do something like this for yourself. I continued bending, cutting, and fastening the conduit until I had a path to each box from the breaker panel and was ready to start pulling some wires. And that's exactly where we'll pick up next time. At the end of this stage, I'm reasonably happy with the way it's all turned out, even if it will all end up covered in the end. And I do want to take a moment to ask you to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you're finding any enjoyment out of watching me get this done. I know I enjoy doing it, but these videos do take a little bit of time to put together, and I'd like the encouragement to keep going. Either way, I hope to see you back here next time.